Thank you. You said that you're pessimistic, and that's a good place to start what I have to say. But the fact that this conference is here, it's a good sign, right? So maybe today is the day, and this is the place for change, but probably not. Okay. So it's a great project. I salute this project. I love this project. I've been trying to. Vinny, can I call you Vinny? Mentioned the comparative design. I've been trying to get similar data in Arizona and California in the U.S., and this made me even more admire this project because it's really, you really have to go to many, many boring parties to have this kind of lag. The law, the federal law and state law it declares these case files as public information once the case is closed. However, there are gazillions pages of exemptions, and basically all employers are exempted from having the cases that are related to their workplace from being revealed even after it is closed. So I really salute you for sticking in that party and talking with this guy, and also really for the project itself, for going into these qualitative materials and reading these hundreds of pages in order to give us really a glimpse, and we got nothing here relative to, Vinny has a book about age and sex and race discrimination coming out of this project, and now he's finishing his sabbatical, so I'm sure there is another book on the way about age discrimination, where really he gives us on a tray a glimpse of what is going on within the organizations in the everyday life, how all this age or sex or race discrimination, capital D, happens in the everyday life. And I think it's invaluable both for a public policy. You know, we have to know what is going on in order to try to remedy it. And also in terms of our own research, what do the numbers that we run all day on this data, these green numbers, what do they mean? I don't know that we really know, and these books are really, I'm already saying these books, right? Expectations are high. Okay, but despite this introduction, I'm not going to talk about your presentation in my comments. I'm going to use it as a springboard, and it will be very clear how it is used as a springboard, but I'm going to just talk about whatever I want to talk about, which is the remediation or implication of what we know about age discrimination for the remediation of age discrimination. This is the pessimistic side, right? Okay, so now I'm going to start. I don't have time limitation, right? It's a comment. Each basis of exclusion, gender, race, or ethnicity, is unique. But age, I think, has a few characteristics that set it aside from other categories. And this affects both the pattern of discrimination, and we saw it in this presentation, as Vinny mentioned, and also it affects its remediation. So unlike other types of discrimination, age discrimination has a cultural and economic appeal that is not perceived as problematic or as not legitimate. Culturally, we prefer the young. The popular images of beauty, of vitality, of creativity, and so forth are associated with young age, especially among women. Economically, the going justification for preferring the young at work is very commonsensical. Older workers are not as productive because of their health correlates with older age. They are not technologically apt because it is more difficult for them to keep up with changes. Depriving the old makes sense, given their location in the life cycle relative to the young. And paying for seniority makes no business case as opposed to paying for performance. This argument is very much in line with wider organizational dynamics of restructuring, as Vinny mentioned, wherein the going business logic is, in the last few decades, is toward reducing fixed costs, reducing employers' fixed costs that are not typically directed to productivity. Now, all these assumptions are discriminatory in their core, in the sense that they make inferences about workers on the basis of one category, their age. not paying for seniority is not really discriminatory in and of itself, but the implication of this logic in practice is avoiding hiring older workers because of the assumption that hiring them means paying an automatic premium for their seniority. So, and all these assumptions don't exist or are not regarded as legitimate today in contemporary society in the case of gender and race discrimination. Now, one outcome of this commonsensical rhetoric is that the kind of self-criticism or self-censoring reaction that appears in relation to sex or race discrimination doesn't exist in the case of age discrimination. Discriminating by age makes sense, and it is the subject of an open public debate. If you open the newspaper, almost every day there is an article about whether we should or we shouldn't put our elderly in the snow. It's legit to talk about it, and it's legit to say sure, and it's also legit to say no sometimes. You cannot imagine a parallel discussion about race or sex or, of course, disability. And this has several implications for the remediation of age discrimination. First, much of what we know about the mechanisms for remedying inequality and reducing discrimination comes from research about sex and race categories and may have limited applicability if we try to apply it to the case of age. For example, much research in cognitive and social psychology points to accountability and awareness as cognitive mechanisms, as effective cognitive remedies for discrimination in the workplace. For example, studies show that managers that know that they might be asked to explain their hiring or promotion decisions put more cognitive efforts in their decisions, and this reduces their reliance on stereotypes or other automatic cognitive processes of categorization. Similarly, research shows that when managers are made aware of the aggregate discriminatory impact of their decisions for gender or racial groups, they make more effort to avoid such disparate impact. People don't want to think of themselves as doing bad things, and when they realize that they do, they try to avoid that. And a lot of the common remedies for discrimination, such as formalizing and monitoring human resources decisions for numerical impact, are based on this logic of creating this accountability and this awareness. This is why we have, this is a big reason why we have all the bureaucratization of human resources practices. And these things have resulted indeed in lower levels of sex and racial exclusion. And the Israeli EEOC, the Israeli Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, adopted this idea full-heartedly. Today, if you look at the brochure that the Israeli EEOC gives out to employers to how to avoid all types of discrimination, it includes the main message there is creating this accountability and this awareness through formalization of human resources practices. But the point is that these remedies are likely not relevant for age discrimination, because unlike with race and gender, employers choose to discriminate by age, just as they choose to discriminate by criminal record, for example, or drug use. For the most part, age discrimination is not a subconscious process where public or organizational policy can save managers from their own weaknesses. Rather, it is a strategic business choice. And so, as Vinny has shown, actually I thought that you would show that, but eventually you didn't talk about it, but as you will read in this book. Formalization of decision-making is more likely to result in efforts to bypass these formal processes of decision-making and continue with discrimination rather than in lowering age discrimination. And so we need to figure out what kind of public policy and organizational mechanisms we need to develop in order to reduce age discrimination in the workplace. Whatever we know from the scant research we have regarding other categories, gender and race, likely won't work here. We're not talking about subconscious discrimination. The second point is that remedying age discrimination is complicated not only because of the conscious nature of exclusion, but also because the unreflective nature of the discourse making the case for age diversity in the workplace. So the common arguments are three, I think. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. The first, actually luckily not that common, is that it's the law. You cannot discriminate because it's the law. From everything we know to date, this is as an effective argument for change as telling my kids in the morning, you have to get out of bed now. It will not happen. No way. It will not happen without a carrot. Anyway, it is very rare to see this kind of justification that you're not allowed to discriminate, and therefore you're not supposed to. 2 minutes. I didn't see that. No, okay. Oh, no problem. The second common justification for diversity, for age diversity, is it's the right thing to do because we will all be older, as opposed to gender and ethnic diversity. We will never become, most of us will never become the other sex or a different ethnic category. Though there are recent findings that, for example, gender wage gaps go down when the CEO has his first girl, his firstborn daughter. So that's similar. We shouldn't discriminate. You shouldn't discriminate against women because you might have a daughter one day, and she might want to try to work. So it's a similar logic. It's the right thing to do because we will all be older. But it's the kind of benevolent and paternalistic approach that end up with very limited integration and actually erects boundaries rather than reduces them. And finally, the business case for diversity, for age diversity, actually is so. I have to say it's so enthusiastic that it comes out from the other side. So the business case is usually older people are more productive than younger people. This rhetoric creates the opposite discrimination. Older workers don't have kids and they don't have reserved service to distract them from work. They're here to stay. They will not look for another job in a couple of years. They're loyal. They have nothing. They have nowhere to go, and so forth. So this rhetoric basically solves one problem by creating another, and again, it erects boundaries rather than reduces them. The last problem I want to talk about, the problem in the commonsensical logic of age discrimination is also reflected in images of remedies in the popular discourse and the lack of legal consciousness. Guy, you just came in the point that you heard already 5 times. So you're going to hear it again. Hi. So the advice literature for all the workers, the popular literature, the legal literature, regarding how to find work and how to avoid discrimination while at work, tends to focus on remedying the worker, not the employer or the society, God forbid. Most advice given to all the workers in the human resources as well as social science discourse revolves around passing. This discourse implicitly or not so implicitly reconfirms stereotypes about all the workers. So, for example, in a publication by an organization consulting families, an article about the problem of older workers lists key words. Personal flexibility, adjustment to new technologies, and entrepreneur thinking. In a human resource magazine, all the workers receive professional advice from insiders on how not to be excluded and isolated at work. The advice goes like that. Don't emphasize your age. Don't act as if you know everything. Don't begin your sentences with the phrase, "In my days, we used to do things differently." Learn contemporary lingo, and so on. One of these articles even mentioned changing your dress style and dyeing your hair. Can you imagine that in the case of, again, sex discrimination, though you do hear that in the case of race. And even in the self-help website, I went into the Tapuz blog, the older worker group there in Tapuz, and all the workers themselves talk about not quitting their jobs despite harassment and exclusion. One blog was titled, "Working and Kicking." And the writer says, "So what if I'm hurt by harassment at work? I'm tough and I'm not going to leave." And other mentioned that they removed their age from their CV as a way to avoid discrimination. So the strategy of passing as young is something that we will not hear when we talk about sex discrimination. Again, as I said, though we do hear it in the case of ethnic and racial minorities. Similarly salient is the absence of the law in this discourse. So this woman is working and kicking, but she will not go to the Israeli EOC, though we do see an increase in the proportion of charges that come from all the workers. There is almost no mention of the law, of rights, of justice, of morals in this discourse. The burden is on the older worker to fix the problem, not society or the law. Even the legal discourse itself has a hard time emancipating itself from these stereotypes, and I adore your work, for that, once I understand it. Even the legal discourse, I said that. Okay, so for example, age discrimination is discussed as distinguished from sex or racial discrimination because there are real differences between old and young. For example, health differences. So it's okay. How is that different from the fact that, on average, women are more likely to give birth, to be pregnant, than men? Would that be a reason to discriminate against women? Okay. I just want to mention one more point about the intersection. Okay, we actually talked a lot about the intersection during the day, so I don't need to talk a lot about it, but most of the discourse, as you can imagine, is white and masculine. The public face of the older worker is a smiling white man with gray hair. Women dyed hair. Numerically, this might be right, but not proportionally, of course. And this discourse ignores the intersection of categories of exclusion wherein women or minorities face different types of challenges and exclusion based on combination of different demographic statuses. I just, again, we talked about it at length. I just want to mention an illustrative example that I ran into last night as I was reading the newspaper article. It was a newspaper article in favor of older people. So the article begins with the claim that an older female worker should be thought of as the madam or the Parisian prostitute, someone that has seen much and knows to deal with all situations, and that's the reason to hire her. So, okay, I think I can leave it at that.
I have one question on your chart about the increase. It's not a chart on the increase, it's the proportion of displaced workers in 2010. And I was wondering if this, because you said that we assisted an increase in displacement of older workers, cannot this be related to the crisis in the United States, and especially because these people, with the chart you presented afterwards about the fact that these people are more found now out of the labor force, is probably, I don't know, I just wonder if cannot be linked to the fact of the crisis and of course the consequences it had in the States. And may I ask the second question? Now, it seems that also the number of trial and cases for age discrimination has increased in the Ohio. This means that, no, the question is how these people have been reintegrated, or what has been the solution to their cases, or and don't you think that, or do you think this is the best way to go? Normative actions are don't make older people more costly for the employers and can push them not to hire them because they know that they will have a higher cost in employing them compared to younger workers. It's just a question, huh?
Sure. With regard to the first question, was whether or not the displacement was a function of the current economic crisis. I'm not sure. It may be or may not be. What I'm doing, or what I was going to do before I came here, was to actually chart worker displacement 10 more years back. Because the trend over the last 10 years has been steadily this sort of bifurcation. So the current economic crisis, this trend had begun before the current economic crisis. So I don't know. I think I'd have to chart it back a little bit further to be sure, and then to chart it into the future to make sure that it isn't just a blip, because of the current economic crisis. But I don't think it is. it was right. If anything, it was amplified by it. Right, trying to save the business and look for any way to cut costs and show profits to your shareholders. And I think this was one way to do it in the face of the current economic crisis. Like, how do we save ourselves? Well, if we can shed some of these other costs rather than raising profit by creating more product, you could shave costs. And this, I think, was a last-ditch effort. But I'd have to see. Your second question was, does the filing of cases like this raise the costs for employers?
This is the first.
Yeah.
In between, I just wanted to know if you know how these people then after, or if this really leads to a reintegration or kind of.
That's a good question. You know, I haven't followed up with any of these people, although I've thought of it. Yeah, it's the next book. I know that they don't know I have their data on their particular case. It's officially public data, but I have their home phone numbers and addresses, and I've thought of at least doing a sort of a random survey and just saying, hey, just a general survey about where the jobs you've had in your life and where you've ended up. No, there's no follow-up by the Civil Rights Commission. I've had my hands full enough with the qualitative data that I have to follow. But it's a great question. I've thought about it. I'm trying to get a couple graduate students to actually do the follow-up survey with a subsample of these people.
Just a quick question. Are there really more cases of age discrimination in Ohio, or has a litigious generation come of age?
No, this is a way underestimate. On the race cases I have, the sex cases, age cases, I'm convinced they're underestimates, including the verified cases. I showed you 12,000 age cases. 2,000 of them were verified, but one thing over that beer that the Civil Rights Commissioner said to me is, because they're not verified doesn't mean they're not discrimination. It's just there maybe wasn't enough evidence that we felt we could go to the Attorney General and he would take the case. So they just didn't have witnesses, for instance. So they didn't want to sort of go forward with the case. And then there are the countless, I don't know how to estimate it. I had a reviewer sort of say, well, certainly this is an estimate. How much discrimination really is going on? And I thought, who among us can tell how much discrimination is really going on? Like I said, especially in the hiring cases, you just don't know. They're not those little bells and whistles that would trigger consciousness over the issue. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you can regard that as discrimination. You can try. I don't know if you would regard that as discrimination, but if you look at the overtime statistics, secular, regardless of the business cycle, you see an increase in unemployment and the length of unemployment spells among the older workers, the elderly, and also a decline in job security. And the length of jobs. So that's a sign that there is something going on there increasingly.
Yeah, just a short comment and maybe a question about the last thing that you said. You said that most of the cases are firing cases, and this is just because people tend to sue their employer after they're being fired. The problem is with other cases of discrimination, but with age discrimination especially, is with the promotion, training, denial of training, and most of all, and you talked about that. People who are looking for a job and are giving up this because they can't find a job and they are excluded for years. And the question is, what do we do about those cases? Because I'm not worried about the white, male, mid-level managers being fired, have the benefits. They will sue, they will get the money. What do we do about those who can't get a job? Clearly a case of age discrimination and no evidence or no comparative group to say I wasn't hired because of that. And just a short comment about something that Sandra said, that usually with age it's a rational decision. I chose not to hire you because you're not productive or more costly. Sometimes it's also subconscious decision. Sometimes it's just about, and there were many interviews with employers and it's a very complex thing. It's also about death anxiety, and not to be surrounded by old people, not to give orders to a person who looks like your father. So it's more complex. Yeah.
I think at the very least, relative to your first question to me, public education campaigns that age discrimination is illegal, which surprises me even in the state of Ohio. People don't know it's illegal because it's not politicized the way race or sex is. And in fact, that was one of my gifts back to the Civil Rights Commission. They were like, tell us, they handed me data on race, sex, and age, which amounted to 80,000 cases, if you include race and sex in there, and said, we don't know how to process this data. And I said, how about I process the data and show you pie charts, and it might give you a sense of where you might better publicly educate your employees. Even those that knew that age discrimination was illegal thought that age discrimination meant not hiring. They had no idea it had to do with firing or harassment, so there is, at least relative to other forms of discrimination, I think at the very least, public sort of amplification of this in public dialogue and providing education for where you go, what you do, what is illegal, what's not illegal would be at least a start.
You may have just answered my question. I wondered whether living in a state with a history of unionization and a history of that kind of culture compared to a southern state or a southwestern state, whether you, even though it may underestimate age discrimination, given your reason just now and others, it really underestimates it nationally, I would guess.
Right. I think so. I mean, Ohio is historically, despite the election of a governor that is definitely anti-union right now, it's historically a union state, which meant there was at least some politics of fairness in the workplace. But still, they're understaffed, underfunded. There are 5 offices in the state, sort of satellite offices, which, by North Carolina, South Carolina standards, is amazing amount of resources. But the investigators, we got to actually hang out down there at the Civil Rights Commission, watch. I get a call from investigators saying, come on in, I have somebody called, they're coming in. And I think there were 4 investigators processing every case in Columbus, Ohio, which was thousands of cases a year. And it's sort of like social workers, too few, and that might actually limit, but I can't imagine in a state where there's very little. There may be an official agency, but it's essentially hollow. They may be...
Yes.
It's okay.
Yes, I have a question about the idea of age discrimination when someone is earning much more than the alternative. Because, for example, suppose that whenever you hire a black woman, then you have to pay 25% more than the alternative. Would you call that also discrimination? Suppose, if someone is more expensive, why do you call this discrimination?
But why do you assume that? So someone older is applying to a job ad. Instead of assuming that you have to pay more, you can say, okay, I don't want to pay this premium for seniority anymore. I'm going to pay you X, which is less. Maybe he wants to take it, maybe he doesn't. That's not discrimination. But if you say, oh, you're this age, I'm not interviewing you, that's discrimination.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, guys, I would like to thank you guys very much.